Good evening. Welcome to the 208th event of CIC. For many of you who don't know about CIC, we are a not-for-profit organization. We are engaged mainly in conducting intellectual discussions, book releases, and we've been doing this for the past from 2017 onwards. So we have crossed the 2 century mark, and we hope by next year or middle of maybe end of next year, we'll have our own auditorium in which we can host all these events. So welcome to this event, and let me introduce today's eminent panel. We have Sri Kumar Verma. Sri Kumar Verma is a prominent Indian author, a playwright, a poet, and a newspaper columnist. His accomplished novels include Lament of Mohini, 2000, Maria's Room in 2010, Kipling's Daughter in 2018. In the realm of children's literature, his notable works are Devil's Garden, Tales of Pappudam in 2006, The Magic Store of Nu Cham Wu, 2009, and Parasi Raja, The Royal Rebel in 1997. His collected plays, Five and Other Plays, and Midnight Hotel and Other Plays, were published in 2019. Educated at the Madras Christian College with an MA and MPhil in English Literature, Mr. Verma also holds a journalism qualification. He has been a lecturer in English Literature and Journalism at the Madras Christian College and has taught creative English at the Chennai Mathematical Institute. His illustrious family includes the artist Raja Ravi Verma and the latest ruling Maharani of Travancore, Sethu Lakshmibai. His plays such as The Dark Lord, Bow of Rama, and Platform have been well received, often premiering with established theatre groups like the Madras Players. His contributions extend to newspapers and magazines, and he has been honored with the R.K. Narayan Award for Excellence in Writing in English in 2015 and the Charles Wallace Fellowship 2004. He currently resides in Chennai with his family. Please welcome him with a round of applause. May I invite you to the stage, please. Another illustrious panelist of today, Dr. Chitra Madhavan, familiar to most of you. She has an MA and an MPhil in Indian history and a PhD in ancient history and archaeology. She is the recipient of 2 postdoctoral fellowships. She has published 9 books, History and Culture of Tamil Nadu in 2 volumes, Vishnu Temples of South India in 5 volumes, Sanskrit Education and Literature in Ancient and Medieval Tamil Nadu and Epigraphical Study, and Temples of Kanjipuram. She has written the text for a coffee table book, Snapshots of a Bygone Era, A Century of Images, which contains about 100 photographs of monuments of India. She has also co-edited a book, South India Heritage, which contains 500 articles on various aspects of South India's heritage and culture, and has edited a book on sculpture published by Kalakshetra Foundation, which contains 20 articles on iconography by well-known authors on this subject. Chitra is also the editor of books on the Ranganatha Swami Temple in Srirangam, the Varadaraja Perumal Temple in Kanjipuram, and the Srivilputtur temples. She regularly conducts heritage tours to places of historical and archaeological significance in India and abroad. Welcome, Dr. Chitra Madhavan. May we have you on the stage, please? And now about our author, Dr. Arun Krishnan. Dr. Arun Krishnan has studied and lived in various cities across India, USA, Singapore, and Japan before setting down roots in Bangalore. He started off with a degree in engineering and a doctorate and went on to work in IT, high performance computing, bioinformatics, computational biology, and HR analytics. He has worked at various corporations, research institutes, and in academia as an assistant professor of computational biology. And then, just to shake things up, Arun went off for an MBA and turned entrepreneur. He is a polyglot and is conversant in Tamil, English, Hindi, Bengali, Japanese, and Kannada. He loves to sing and plays the guitar, keyboard, and percussion instruments. He is also an amateur historian and enjoys visiting historical places. While he has over 50 articles in journals, the Battle of Vatapi trilogy is his first work of fiction. And we are happy at the CIC to be the launch pad for this trilogy. Please join us on the stage. And I hope we'll get to hear you sing at the end of the session. Thank you very much. Now it's over to you.
Such a pleasure. These are three worlds you will sort of immerse yourself in and you wouldn't like to get out of it. I'd like to hand over these three volumes to Dr. Chitra. Nobody else better placed to receive it. Actually, is that audible? I thought that was. Is that better? I'm sorry. Because my voice is softer than yours. You sing. Actually, it's a strange pattern that we three are placed here together because as far as writing goes, my writing is history in fiction. In my story, I bring in fiction from, and even my first book was about a Parashi Raja, which is a historical character. And the second is Dr. Arun, whose book is history as fiction, or fiction as history. No, history as fiction. And Dr. Chitra is pure history. History set in stone, temples, sculptures, and things like that. And this tremendous trilogy of these three books. This is the first time that I think we are concentrating on the South. We've always had these stories. In fact, about more than 10 years ago, I remember sitting like this with Amish Tripathi and Ashwin Sanghi, and I asked them. They have created these vast worlds of where you don't know whether you're slipping into history or staying back in fiction, or you don't know. You can't even. So I said, what happens if there is a huge flood in India one day and everything is lost and only your books are available, which means the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the histories are all gone. So people will just see your books as history. Amish didn't reply at that time, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I remember he had taken that up and he had answered it somewhere. So like him, I'm fascinated by the way that he could bring up history and then tell it in a fictional sort of way. And in a way, both of them started out as from childhood, being in love with history. Dr. Chitra, 8th standard girl going for a South Indian tour with her parents and falling in love with the temples and stone. And then 10th standard, she realized that I will have nothing else to do in my life but this. So that's how she became. And his father was posted in Tanjavur. I mean, I'm so sorry. I was posted all over the place, but Tanjavur was his base. And the Brihadishwar temple was a common sort of starting point for many of their. So I would like to invite Dr. Chitra to first talk about history and then bring him into it as the hero of the day. And I would like to express my utmost happiness that we are in the presence and before Dr. Pradeep Chakravarti.
Namaste and a very good evening to all of you. Honored and delighted to be here this evening. I have been reading Dr. Arun Krishnan's books.
You can just call me Arun.
Arun's books over the last few weeks, and I have been doing little else. All official work abandoned, everything else abandoned. These are unputdownable, and I need to congratulate you on this. And more so because, as he just mentioned, much of our history, written history, is concentrated north of the Vindhyas. I've said this before and I'm saying this again. South Indian history, the history of South India, has been largely ignored and neglected. When I was in school and I decided to take up history as my profession, it was only mainly because of that South India tour my parents took me on. I hadn't studied South Indian history in school, nor in college first year. It was only in the second year of college that there was one subject called History of Tamil Nadu, and that got me hooked again. So your books are going to go a long, long way in encouraging people to study about the history of South India, to get them interested in this. And all the more important because I think schools nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, are abandoning history altogether. There are many schools that don't teach history beyond the 8th standard, and we are the poorer for it. So your books are going to go a long way, and because they are unputdownable, all the more so.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
He's not just a writer of history books or fiction in history. It's like taking a huge bottle or a huge box and filling it up with things, and like it says in his bio shake things up, to shake things up. So to free up little more space, he's got this new facet also. So tell me about this fascination with history and how all this started in a completely different environment altogether.
Sure. First of all, thanks to CIC for inviting me and for hosting this. Thanks to Chino sir for helping arrange this. I owe him for all this. I feel a little bit like a new player, IPL player in the RCB sitting next to, between Virat Kohli and Faf du Plessis. And I know there's a lot of CSK fans here, but Mundina Sala Cup Namde. I want to make sure that that comes up. Anyway, because it's when Chino sir said, okay, send books to, Shriji and Chitraji, and my heart started palpitating. I'm like, my goodness, okay. And till I heard back from her saying, she said, I like your book. I was on tenterhooks. But so thank you so much. Now, it's strange. I always was interested in history. So they say that great teachers get you involved with the subject. Uniformly, history teachers, and with due respect to any history teachers here, I'm sitting next to one, most history teachers in schools are those who don't teach history because they are passionate about it. It's been thrust on them. And but in 7th standard, when I was in Bengal, we had a wonderful teacher. I had her only for 1 year in that 7th standard. At that time, the National Museum, Calcutta National Museum, had, I don't know if it still does, but it had one of Ashoka's inscriptions, okay? Devanam Piya Piya Dasi, and etc. And she actually, and in those days, so we were in Haldia, in a small town called Haldia. Now it's much more famous because of the port and stuff, but she took a bus all the way to Calcutta, went to the Calcutta National Museum, copied out the entire inscription, came back, taught us the script, and then I remember she asked us to write that inscription in the Brahmi script in the exam. This is 7th standard, okay? I loved it. But then after that, you had the typical boring history teachers. And however, we were just talking, and Shriji mentioned about that, we're from Tanjore, and our Kuladevam is near Tanjore, and we used to go there, and the Brihadeshwara temple was always just absolutely fascinated me. I would be standing there. I'm saying, this is not even recent, right? I'm saying since I was maybe a teenager, I would go there, and I would be standing there and thinking, I wonder if Rajaraja Chola stood in this exact spot that I'm standing on, right? And how many of you have gone to Brihadeshwara? I'm sure everybody has. Okay. If you know, there's one Nandi which is on the left, right? And it looks misshapen. And Dr. Madhavan corrected me. She said it's not a mistake. And I let her tell us why it's not a mistake. I'm actually very curious about it. But I used to see that, and then, and typically the myths about the Brihadishwara temple was, oh, they started building that Nandi and it didn't come out well, so they abandoned it and built the other Nandi. The other myths, common myths, are the shadow never falls elsewhere, which is a myth. The biggest myth is there is an 80-ton monolithic block on top, which is a myth. It's not 80 tons. I think there are 8 sections. Many more sections. So it's, and so, yeah. But I would be, in my head, I would be thinking up stories about what would explain that Nandi there, etc. Life took me, along the path to multiple places, but then eventually, 2009, my wife and I did a Karnataka, just like Chitraji's South India trip. We did a road trip from Bangalore to Chitradurga, Hampi, Aihole, Pattadakkal, Badami, Udupi, Mangalore, and then back. And to me, visiting Hampi is just, it crushes your, it makes your spirit soar, but at the same time, it crushes you. It crushes you because of the devastation that you see there, right? But then you go to Aihole and Pattadakkal. By the way, Aihole has this inscription, which is the Prashasti of Pulikeshi by Ravi Kirti, which is one of the main ways to date Kalidasa, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Also Kalidasa, because he mentions Kalidasa, and we know that that was in the 7th century, around early 600s or 610s or something. So Kalidasa had to be before that. So it's, but if you go there, and if you're a lover of history, you would literally weep, because the path to get to the top of that little Jain temple, it's atrocious, it's muddy, you have to wade through mud to go there, you climb up some broken steps, there is one abandoned ASI board there which says, hey, ASI is in charge of this, and then you see that Prashasti there, there's just a little overhang built on top of it to quote unquote protect it maybe. But you go there and then you realize, that is the history that isn't told. All we know about Pulikeshi is with reference to Harshavardhana. Harshavardhana lost to Pulikeshi and he didn't cross the Narmada river. That's what we are taught. We were never taught about Immudi Pulikeshi in school, right? So to me, that was a revelation. And then what happened around 2011, I think the Meluha series came out, Amish's Meluha series. And I read that and then something clicked for me. And that's when I started writing Nandi's Charge. So Nandi's Charge, I started in 2011. I wrote about 100, I would say 100 pages, 150 pages maybe. And then I abandoned it because, I got work. At that time, I had just turned entrepreneur, and being an entrepreneur is very, very stressful to say the least. And then COVID hit after a few years. And that's when I sent out my manuscript to Garuda Prakashan. And I forgot about it. 3 months later, I hear from them saying, if you can complete this, we are ready to publish it. And to me, that was, I'm like shocked. Somebody actually wants to publish what I write. So anyway, I published it, sent it off, and as luck would have it, that got published. And then HarperCollins kind of said, we are interested in the whole trilogy, and that's how they came into the picture. But yeah, so the first book took an eternally long time. It took almost 10 years from the time I started writing it. The other 2 books I wrote in 3 months flat. I write fast. So when I start writing, I write really fast. So for me, I can, if I start writing seriously, finish a book in 3 months. But then editors will have to tell me whether I make them work hard for that first draft or not. So yes, then, yeah.
About that Nandi that he was saying maybe misshapen. No way it's misshapen. So when you go into the Tanjavur Brihadeshwara temple, as soon as you enter through the Gopurams, you find that huge Nandi Mandapam with a huge monolithic Nandi, which is very famous. And then if you care to look, on the left is this much smaller Nandi, looking somewhat sad. And he is slightly damaged also. That was the original Nandi installed in the time of Rajaraja Chola. And if you notice, he'll be not looking straight, but his neck will be slightly turned. And I like to imagine that the artist, the sculptor who chiseled that Nandi, wanted to tell you that, like, if I wanted to look at that lady sitting right at the back and there's somebody obscuring my view over here, wouldn't I do this? So that Nandi was there and the Shivalingam was right inside the main Garbhagriha, the people, crisscrossing, and he's doing this to see his Lord and Master. So, in fact, many of you may not like it if I say this, but that Chola Nandi is far superior aesthetically, artistically, than that huge monolithic Nandi that you see 600 years later.
That came under what? The
Nayak
the
period,
Nayak.
yeah.
Okay. See, I learn something every day, and this is why I was worried when she was reading my book.
Actually, one more question. Most of these sculptures which are there, don't you think from thousands of years ago there would have been sort of storms and all sorts of things which would have made them less gainly than they were at first, and then other people would have maybe made repairs or done something which made it. So don't you think that would have also taken a toll? Damage and the repair.
That as well, but you see, most of our sculptures are made of hard granite, and a little amount of weathering has happened. Wanton desecration, of course, has happened during wars, especially armies that came from the north. A little bit of repair work, plastering, etc., has also happened, and that does take away from the image, no doubt. But if you see these Pallava and Chola images, though they are weather worn, they talk to you. They are so beautifully done. The expressions are still there, even when the features are worn smooth. It's there.
One of the first things that I did after reading the book was Google about Vathapi Ganapatim Bhajayam. And then I came across this wonderful thing where there's the South Indian Tamil Nadu temple where the deity is still there, but the deity was brought there by Sivatondar, who is mentioned in his previous avatar in your book.
So the temple is Tiruchengattangudi in Tanjore, where they have the Vathapi Ganap. Okay, so there's before Chitra ma'am comes in, I will say it. It's also one of the myths potentially that was brought by Siritondar, is what I hear. But in my book,
that's also there in Wikipedia.
Correct. But in my book, see, I'm a historical fiction writer, so I can take these creative liberties. I think it's a much nicer story that Paranjoti fell in love with that Vathapi Ganapati and brought it to Tiruchengattangudi, which is his hometown. But yes, so I actually I had gone for some function there just about 2-3 months ago. So I got to go to Tiruchengattangudi and go to that place. It was on the way, so I told my parents that we have to stop there. Because I also have a photo of the empty Garbhagriha in Badami Fort, which appears in the novel, right? Where he picks up this thing. So there is an empty Garbhagriha. So I kind of imagine that's where the Vathapi Ganapati was. And then I kind of completed the circle by going to Tiruchengattangudi and seeing the other one. So.
My take on this? Yes, you're absolutely right. That Ganapati could have been in that empty chamber there's nothing to say he wasn't there. And Tiruchengattangudi being the hometown of Sirutondar, who was Paranjoti, the commander-in-chief of Narasimhavarman I, Mamalla, he apparently did bring that image with him, and now it's called Vathapi Ganapati, though not the one that Muthuswami Dikshitar sang about.
Oh, is that? Okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was the same Ganapati he sang about.
No? No, I wouldn't. Okay. I don't think so.
Okay, that's a sad thought.
Why?
I thought this song was, whenever I would sing the song, I thought we could.
No, you can just think of Ganapati in that chamber in Badami, where he originally belonged.
Vathapi.
Vathapi.
Okay, so this is where we meet now, fiction and history. you have told people that you have writer's block at times, or plot blocks, that you observe people in the airport and then you bring them into your works. So that was fascinating to me, because that's okay with writing fiction, but here you are recreating history in and giving them the garb of fiction. So how do you manage this? How do certain things like there are a lot of these wars where you have the dates and you have the outcomes and you have the name of the war, things like that. But here you have one lazy little carriage going there, and then suddenly there's an attack on it, and a little skirmish just to prove a point, which takes you back to that earlier plan. So how do you come up with this? The what is that core, that seed of history, and how do you sort of
So look, if you're writing about, so if I were to write about Shivaji, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, it would be very tough to write a historical fiction about him because so much more is known. So one of the good things about writing about a period which is 7th century is there's not a lot that is known. So for example, if you're talking about this period, I actually found it a very fascinating period. I'll tell you why, right? So you had 3 of the biggest kings of that time. So you had Harshavardhana in the north, you had Pulikeshi, and then you had Narasimhavarma Pallava. Bhakti movement was just starting out. Appar was around the same time. Tirunjana Sambandar was around the same time. Huan Sang visited India around the same time. And interestingly, he went and met all 3 of these major kings. So it's almost as if an alien comes to Earth and is able to meet Biden, Xi Jinping, Putin, and Modi all at the same time. It's just weird how this one, Buddhist devotee from China could meet all 3 major kings at that time period. So now, what is known about so there are a few facts that are known. The fact that Pulikeshi had indeed come down to Kanchi and defeated Mahendravarma Pallava. Again, there are 2 versions of it. Mahendravarma Pallava's version would be that he didn't defeat me because he didn't take Kanchi at that point. Pulikeshi's claims he took. So we'll go with that. Second piece is that Narasimhavarma Pallava did go to Vathapi and defeat Pulikeshi, because there is an inscription, right? If you've gone to Badami, I don't know, how many of you have gone to Badami? A few. Did you notice that inscription at the bottom of the fort? So there are 2 spurs. There's a left spur and a right spur. The right spur has the caves, right? The Buddhist and Jain and Hindu caves. And the left spur at the bottom, there's actually an inscription by Narasimhavarma Pallava. So you know that happened. And in that he mentions 4 battles. Battle of Manimangala, Suramara, Pariyala, and then finally Vathapi is where he goes in. We know where Manimangala is. It's about 20 kilometers northeast of Kanchi. Yeah? We know where Vathapi is, obviously. That's Badami. We have no idea where Suramara and Pariyala are. I did a lot of trying to find out if anybody knew. Nobody seemed to know where they were. So the Suramara and Pariyala is Parivipura in the book. That are in my book are just my own imaginations of where they could have been. They have nothing to do with the actual locations because we don't know. We know, for example, Paranjodi was the commander of Pulikeshi. We don't know, we know that Pulikeshi had 5 sons. Apart from that, we know that he had some, Ganga allies because he was married into that house, Sri Lankan allies. The Pandya king, Jayantavarman, was an ally. We know that, and that's about it. So if you're writing a story, these are the bare facts. How do you write it? Now, typically, what happens is most folks, when we write historical fiction, we tend to focus on the kings, right? Oh, the king did this, the king did that. I wanted to get away from it. In my understanding, if, let's say we have uh, we have the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. He's not running around doing stuff. There are going to be bureaucrats and generals and minions who do his. He will be directing it, but he's not going to be running around doing the actual work. So I kind of wanted to come at it from the point of view of a normal, a lowly captain or something in the army who has been tasked with doing certain things. So in the first couple of books, the kings are not really, if you notice, the main characters, right? They just flit in and out. They don't even, they're in the background. There'll be some meetings, they'll be updated about stuff, but they are not really the centerpieces of this book. The book is told through the eyes of these captains who do what needs to be done. And then you start off, and yes, as far as characters are concerned, there are writers who, Cheta, I don't know how you write. Do you actually like map out every single character or even the scenes and stuff? No, okay. Okay. So I don't, at least, okay, he's an accomplished writer. I'm learning the craft, which means that I pick things up along the way. So when I wrote these books, I really didn't have an idea of how to go about it. I had a broad idea and I would start writing and then the characters would just come to me as I wrote. So for example, I'll give you an example, right? There is a scene in the first book where this guy is going to get on board a ship that is going to sail from Kanchi to Korkai. Okay? So that's the scene. He's waiting to board that ship. So I started thinking, okay, what's he going to do? I mean, if I have to make it interesting, something has to happen. What's going to happen? And I said, there has to be some other character who catches his eye. Okay, there is a queue. He's in a long line of queues. And then it struck me, and I must confess that this character came from another set of books that I had read. Okay, in the sense, it was a little boy, a boy character, who's playing around with some dogs. He's feeding the dogs. That's how that character came into being. And that character grew into such an important part of the book. I had no concept that it was going to happen at that point in time. It was just a random character who catches the protagonist's eyes. And then it just grew from there. Then suddenly that character becomes, whatever he becomes. And it's so to me, I was telling somebody, I was at this railway station. I love watching people because you pick up so many characteristics that I put into. I keep telling folks, don't mess with authors because you never know how you're going to make the way into one book or the other in a villainish or a cartoonish character. So, but that's how kind of I went about it.
So within this framework of fiction, when he's written history, what did you, through your reading of it, did you find anything amiss or anything? It was...
From the historical perspective, nothing amiss at all. I am actually wondering how he has researched into this and got so many facts that the Pallavas had two emblems. Usually each dynasty has only one emblem. The Chola had the tiger, the Pandya had the two fish, the Chalukyas had the Varaha, the boar, etc. Now he's gone deep enough to find out that the Pallavas had simultaneously two emblems. One was the bull, the Rishabha, the Nandi, Nandi's charge is the name of the first book, and Simha, the lion. They used it alternatively. The Nandi was used, the bull was used when they were ruling from their palace and they were issuing orders. And in those copper plate grounds, the bull would be punched. And then when they were on their long, long marches and they were issuing orders, they would have the seal of the lion on it. I learnt all this from my Manasiha guru, Dr. C. Meenakshi, a very great historian of Pallava history. So I was quite stunned when I saw that Simha's roar and Nandi's charge and about Varaha also. So you've done a whole lot of intense research and everywhere. I'm so happy you brought Huin Sang into this because in school and in college, when we study about Harshavardhana's reign in the 7th century, we learn a Chinese Buddhist pilgrim came to India, crossed icy deserts, and he met Harshavardhana, went to Nalanda, spent many years. None of those books will tell you that this scholar, Buddhist scholar, came all the way to Vathapi, to the Chalukyan Empire when Pulakeshin was ruling at the same time, and then to Kanchipuram, which was a very, very great center of Buddhist, Jain, and Vedic and Vedantic learning. So your book, traces the path of Yuen Tsang right down to Kanchipuram. This will, make a lot of readers sit up and understand that South India had very great centers of learning also, equal to Nalanda, equal to Takshashila, to Vikramashila. Kanchi was no less than any of those others. Very happy you wove that in.
Dr. Arun Krishnan, on all counts, as fiction, as history, you topped it. Now,
Thank you.
let's hear you read from one of the books, whichever you would like to.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it to the audience. I'd marked out 4 passages. I'll leave it to you. One is a description of Kanchi. One is a battle scene, the beginning of a battle scene. Second is the ending of a battle where somebody dies. And the fourth is a little bit of a philosophical digression. Tell me which ones you want to hear. And okay, so the chapter is titled Nagareshu Kanchi. Jasmine among flowers, Vishnu among men, Rambha among women, and Kanchi among cities. Thus sang the great poet Kalidasa about 300 years before the events in this story took place. Kanchi, that fairest of cities. Kanchi, a city that had seen a succession of rulers from the Cholas to the Pallavas since the 2nd century BCE. A city that has been described in the Sangam classic Perumpana Trippadai as flanked by its belt of defensive jungles is that city whose doors are never closed to those who seek the prize. Lovely like the pericarp of the many-petaled lotus, the navel of the dark-hued lord. Kanchi was a city rich in history, culture, and tradition. Here had lived legendary kings of yore. Here they had laughed and fought, warred and caroused, loved and prayed. Here had lived scientists and mathematicians, poets and philosophers, saints and savants. A city that was one of the 7 holiest places for the people of this land in living memory. Kanchi, from where the great Buddhist evangelist Bodhidharma spread Buddhism to China through the Shaolin Temple, where he is said to have initiated the monks into the secrets of the ancient Indian martial arts of Kalaripayattu and Varmakkalai. Kanchi, where Buddhists and Jains, Shaivites and Vaishnavites, and Tantrics and atheists jostled with each other to claim their adherence. Kanchi, a city of 1,000 soaring temples and palaces, of beautiful gardens and lakes, of wide roads, and even wider hearts. Kanchi, a city of cowbells and temple bells, of anklets tinkling among the colonnaded palaces and temples, of voices of traders raised in welcome from dawn to dusk, of horses, carriages, and carts pounding along the main thoroughfares, of the tongues of the Tamils and the Andhras, the Kannadigas and their more northern brethren, mingling with each other from the bazaars to the debating halls of the many great educational institutions in the city. There was also another, less reputable, seamier side to Kanchi, the same as for any other big city. This was an area filled with rogues and scoundrels, thieves and pickpockets, fake sadhus and lechers, rowdies and prostitutes. Both these Kanchis existed side by side, but almost as distinct entities. It was, however, the more reputable side of Kanchi that Ilango found himself in on this March morning. I know that I had a discussion about the seamier side of Kanchi. There was some editorial comment that was made, and I said, so here's one of the things, right? I don't think human behavior has changed a lot over time. It's remained the same. I mean, we had the seamier side of things in the Mahabharata, so lust and deceit and pickpockets and thievery and all of that has been going on for ages. So I'm sure a big city would have its seamier side to it, and that's kind of what I wanted.
And if I may add to that, King Mahendra Pallava himself, in his drama, in his play Mattavilasa Prahasana, refers to the seamier side of Kanchi. So you have authentic information.
Okay, I didn't have that when I wrote it, but good to know.
And just one more question regarding, I don't know which chapter, but it is in the first book. You have mentioned that the king Mamalla was looking at the city of Kanchi from his palace, from the balcony, and he looks at the Kailasanatha temple. And you have very intentionally mentioned, we know that the Kailasanatha temple was built much later, the one we see now, but perhaps, there was a Kailasanatha temple at that time of Mamalla. Now, is that a figment of your imagination, or is there any historical truth in it?
No, that's a figment of my imagination. The way I think about, so if you think about, let's say you think about our murtis in all the ancient temples, Parani or any of those ancient temples, I'm sure the murtis are much older than the temples themselves. And the temples have been, they have been built. There were brick temples, which were then, you would keep the murti the same, but later kings would come and add on to it or build. So it was just my, I guess, creative liberty that I took. It's not necessary that it was, but I wanted people to Google Kailashanatha temple. Honestly, see, yeah. So my role as a historical fiction author is if I can convince, even 5 young folks to go to Google and check out who was Mamalla and what is Kailashanatha and Hugh Sang. I mean, they would know Hugh Sang. Who is Pulikeshi? My job's done.
Now I've read your book line by line.
I know, yes. Now you know why I was worried.
Actually, there's one scene where Ariyur, is it? The place he's this rider is going in. It's late evening, I think, and he's going in there, and there are these inns where people rest and drink and all that. And he goes in there, and that scene is described so vividly. And I was struck by it, and it reminded me of some other book which I read earlier. And then in an interview, he says one of his favorite authors is Louis Lammer. So Sudden, I don't know how many of you have read Sudden. So that he's recreated that in so much, but with the atmosphere of the local, thing. That thing. How do you manage this? This vast thing. How do you bring together this Dr. Arun Krishnan, quiet gentleman sitting here? How does he manage to convey this magnificence?
I can't answer that, but so I was actually surprised earlier that people hadn't picked up on that scene because, okay, so the scene is very similar. How many folks are Western, read or have watched a lot of Western movies? I'm sure a lot of, right? All the Clint Eastwood movies and all. That scene is pretty much, if you watched a movie where the hero is in a bar, somebody comes in, misbehaves with someone, and the hero steps in. It's pretty much that scene, okay? It's just that I took that scene, and because I'm both a Louis Lammer and a Sudden Oliver Strange fan. So Sudden for me when I was growing up was so when I first saw Clint Eastwood, just as a digression, I had watched For a Few Dollars More in Devi, Paradise. In fact, I think I took your scooter to go for it. Anyway, that's my uncle sitting there, and he taught me how to ride a bike. So, and I came out whistling that tune. Okay. I came back home in Ashok Nagar, and I figured that the next morning I got up, I had forgotten that tune. And we didn't have Google in those days to go look it up. So I went back to watch the movie the next day again. Okay. But so the point I'm trying to make is I actually worry, and this is where I would love to hear from you, right? As an author, do you worry that something that you have read from other authors will make its way into your books? Because if you ask me who are the biggest influences on my writing, I would point to 5 authors, okay? Louis Lammer, Jeffrey Archer, for the way he hooks you from that first, you read the first line of a Jeffrey Archer book, you can't put it down till you finish the book, right? Alistair MacLean, for the way he sets up the war scenes and so on and so forth. The great Kalki. Okay. And the fifth one is, I don't know if you've read David Eddings. Anybody has read David Eddings? He's a fantasy author, but his character development is just amazing. And I told you about that little boy character that I cooked up. There's a very similar boy character in one of his books. Okay. But the point, my question to you is, do you worry about it, or how do you get away from it?
I used to worry about it, and I don't think I have ever gotten away with it, but I don't worry about it now. Like you said, there's a play I had written called Platform. It's about people meeting people in the railway station and all those characters. When you look at these people, they are strangers, but they're also familiar. So that's the way when you read other people's work and they come into your work. Yours are three original, beautifully created works. Only you know that where it's come from. Now you just let out a secret, that's all.
Yeah.
So
I'm okay with letting it out because to me, I have to tell you this, right? So there was, you know how Alistair MacLean's dialogues are very laconic, right? There's this understated humor kind of. So I was writing a piece of dialogue. I finished writing it, and I look at it and go, damn, that's so MacLeanish. And I was thinking, should I, take it out? I said, no, let me leave that in it. But you kind of imbibe. The other big effect is, of course, P.G. Woodhouse. Okay. Yes. So I've probably got every single P.G. Woodhouse book in at my home. Only thing is you can't bring that into your work because there's no way you can recreate the master. So I don't even attempt to do anything that he does. But yeah, so it's a little, you kind of pick up, there's some things that get stuck in your memory over the years, which is why most authors say to become a good writer, you have to have read a lot. And I think that's very, very important.
Would you like to,
Sorry, one question. There's a lot of war and plotting and execution and all that. How did you learn so much about war strategy? There's so much of it in your book. Is there again an influence from elsewhere? Or?
It's David Eddings sets wars up beautifully in this thing. But I have a book called Great Wars Through the Ages. It's a coffee table book. So, in fact, I've written some of the footnotes would have which in the third book, there's one where he says, a Yavana soldier told me about a war that had taken place about 800 or so years ago, where they had used this tactic. Why don't we use that tactic? So, and that book is actually quite nice because it has, full page maps of how the movement of the different troops were, what were the phalanxes, etc., how they were positioned. Reading that kind of gives you. And the other thing I found very, very difficult is actually to figure out how to make sure that every battle is different. And that took a lot of time because, so you can make it different. So I also spoke to a few serving or ex-Indian military, Indian Armed Forces folks. How do you plan a war in, let's say, hilly terrain versus if you're on a riverbed versus if you're in a fort, which is more of a defensive, depending on which side you see it from, defensive or offensive. So, yeah, so it took a long time. And one of the, in the third book, I don't want to give it away, but there's this kind of gunpowder thing that is used, which is actually true. They had this Vishwasa Ghati or something like that, which was a mixture of a lot of different minerals, which was flammable and which was used by them. Yeah, so there's a PDF document I can send it to you, which was a war in ancient India. So I went through that to figure out what kind of strategies they were using.
The research shows very clearly.
Okay, one more. All right, now we are left with three. Start of the war, the death of somebody, and some philosophical digression. Which one do you want? Philosophical? Digression? Okay. So this happens just before the last battle, okay? When Mamalla is standing there, uh, thinking about what he needs to do now. He knew that it wouldn't be easy. The Chalukyas were a proud people. They wouldn't give up without a fight. The Pallavas would have to fight all the way to the inner fort. He looked back at his army. Many men would die today. Many of them would never see their homes back in Kanchi. Many wouldn't live to see their villages or farms or their loved ones. Wives would be widowed. Mothers would wail for their sons. Young kids would grow up without their fathers. Sisters would only remember the love showered on them by their heroic brothers. Mamalla sighed. This was a heavy burden. He had always felt it keenly. Kings and kingdoms fought. Ordinary soldiers paid the price for it. Inscriptions would be engraved on walls glorifying their victory. The soldiers might get a few hero stones that their families just might remember for a while. Eventually, even those would be lost in the mists of time. He felt a hand upon his shoulder. It was Commander Paranjoti, his eyes full of compassion. He had just brought news of the deaths of X and Y. I'm not going to reveal who died. Such fine, vibrant young men, gone all too soon, in the prime of their lives. He's thinking now, leaving behind loved ones, perhaps wives or girls whom they were waiting to wed. And all for me. For Kanchi, yes, but ultimately for me, to help me fulfill my promise to my dying father. So in a sense, their dying is upon me. All their deaths will be upon me. He looked at Paranjoti and asked, is it worth it, Paran? Is it worth sacrificing the lives of so many young men of our land for my own selfish needs? Paran put his arm around his king and friend. He smiled. You remind me of another warrior a long time ago. Who? Arjuna, said Paranjoti. He was racked by similar doubts on the battlefield. Mamalla scrunched his eyes, sinking into thought. You're right. At least I don't have to fight my own family, said Mamalla with a hint of a smile. Paranjoti smiled. We all must do our dharma, Narsi. That's about all we can do. The outcome, as you know, is out of our hands. Well, a Shiva Bhakta spouting Vaishnavite philosophy, teased Mamalla. Hari and Hara are the same, you know. The entirety of creation is one. We all arise and fall within that cosmic reality. Ultimately, even this universe of ours will dissolve into nothingness and then be born again. According to our sages, this has already happened 50 times. We are in the 51st such cycle. For the brief period of our existence on this earth, all we can do is our duty to the best of our abilities. What happens, happens. There is no surety that even you or I will come out of this alive. But we have a dharma to follow. Yours is the Rajadharma, while mine is that of a soldier. Krishna, said Mamalla. What? Asked Paranjoti in confusion. You liken me to Arjuna, so I'm calling you my Krishna, a friend who guides one during periods of confusion. Paranjoti grinned. Well, do you want to go out and talk to your troops before you lead them into battle?
Actually, these epics are more known than certain historical facts that you have to. What would you say? And then, would you like to ask him questions?
You're asking whether these epics are historical?
No. I'm saying those stories are more
epics.
familiar to
Definitely.
people than.
Oh, definitely. Because I can even quote an inscription for you which says that the Mahabharata was being expounded to the public at large in a temple in a village called Kuram, not too far from Kanchipuram. So these Upanyasams on the Ramayanam and the Mahabharata, etc., have been there over the centuries, you see, and that's how these stories spread. And even a child would pick it up while sitting somewhere. Whereas historical facts, you have to sit down and study, and only those who can plod can do it. It doesn't just come, especially in a place like India. We have such a glorious history. I always drone on and on about this, but I'll stop very quickly. We have such a fantastic, interesting history. How we have managed to make it the most boring subject in schools is another thing altogether. We worked very hard at this, I have to tell you, and feeling very bad about it as well. I wanted to ask you, Arunji, the spy versus spy, it's very intriguing, very interesting. Half the time you don't know who the spy is and being spied upon by somebody else, and then you find out. And how did you get into that?
Yeah. Yeah.
From
Yes.
Kalki,
So
yeah.
my hat tip to the great Kalki was to name one of the principal spy chief of the Chalukyas as Naganandi, because that was the same in Shivagami in Savadam. Um, look, there were, I mean, if you read the Arthashastra, there Chanakya says that there were spies. So there were spies, 700 years before, or 800 years, or 900 years before the time period. Sorry? Before James Bond. Yeah, I mean, they had spies everywhere. So the idea that there would be spies here as well, and the spies would be up and about, which is why I said, right, the kings are not running around doing things. The other, and I wanted to mention this, I'd mentioned this to both of them. I'm actually a bigger fan of Shivagami in Sabadam than I am of Ponniyin Selvan. The reason is because I thought in Ponniyin Selvan there were a few too many quote unquote chance things that happened to Vandiyathevan, which moved the story forward. Okay. But in Shivagami in Sabdam, it's much tighter, and I just loved that book. Okay. Also, maybe because when I read Shivagami in Sabadam, who is the one who made the artwork for Kalki's books? Manian. The girl that he had drawn on Shivagami in Sabdam, that book, I was fascinated by her. Okay. I was very young then. Okay. So I had a crush on her. Maybe that's why I liked Shivagami in Sabadam. But the one place I kind of didn't like Shivagami in Sabadam is that he made Pulikeshi into this villainish character, which to me, I know he was writing for a Tamil audience. I'm sitting in Bangalore and writing. I can't afford to do all of that. But even then, I don't see. I see these as two great kings, which is why there is a couple of places where even once Pulikeshi says and once Mamalla says in another life we might actually have been friends, because we both have very similar interests in arts. I have got my Aihole and Pattadakal, there's temples that are being built there. He's got his so in this final scene, battle scene where Pulikeshi and he come against each other, before they start fighting, Pulikeshi actually asks him, so what's going on at Mamallapuram? How are the temples coming along? Right? The idea was to show them as, hey, normal characters. They were both kings, ambitious kings. They want to expand their empires. They came up against each other. Nobody's a hero, nobody's a villain in that. So
That was very, very interesting. Sometimes you don't know who the spy is. That's the flavor of.
yeah, I had to okay, so one place there is a spy, and it's difficult to write that because you don't even want to use sometimes pronouns to give away who the spy is. So it becomes tougher to write. Also with historical fiction, I was writing and I said, as regular as clockwork. And then immediately I stopped. You can't use as regular as clockwork because there were no clocks then. So, okay, you go back and say, okay, as regular as a rooster crowing at dawn or something like that. Some convoluted way to put it.
And you've described Sri Lanka beautifully. And the tiff between Madhavamma, the king in exile, and his brother, all that has come out very, very well.
Yeah, thank you. I actually visited Sri Lanka in 2013. So I'd gone to Polonnaruwa. So Anuradhapura, in a sense, was based on what I had seen in Polonnaruwa. Sigiriya Fort I had actually visited, so I could describe it vividly. But one thing I realized is before I started writing the third book, so I had written something where it said, Pulikeshi cantered down on his horse from the top of the fort. Now, something didn't fit very well with me. At that time, my elder daughter had just finished her 12th, and she had the break. So she and I took a road trip We went to Hampi, we went to Aihole, Pattadakal, and Badami and came back. So in Badami, as you're walking up, I look at the stairs and I'm said, there's no way a chariot could go up these stairs. So even simple things like that, sometimes with passage of time you forget. So it's good to go, and she helped me actually in the third book because we were up there mapping out, okay, where do you think Naganandi's palace was? And so we actually said, okay, this was the palace, this was where the king was, there's the administrative section, etc. So that it's always good to visit a place when you write about it.
Very true. And in another place, you'd mentioned that I think a commander-in-chief was more scared of Naganandi than Pulikeshi himself.
Yeah, so Naganandi's character is very, he's dominating, and the only person Pulikeshi lets get away with talking very casually to him is Naganandi. Because so the relationship there is, Naganandi is this very ascetic, he's not married, he's, like they say in Tamil, Kadamai Kanniyam Kattupadu, that kind of a character with no other interest other than to serve his master and to serve the Chalukya. So
between Kalki Krishnamurti and you'll make historians believe there was one Naganandi, I tell you.
Okay. I will take that as high praise coming from you, ma'am.
So I think you will read from one more excerpt, and then we will go into the Q&A session, because afterwards there will be a very tough exercise. He's got 3 books, and you'll be buying these 3 books and you'll be getting his autograph. It'll be a terrific strain on his arms and his hand to keep signing. So we'll keep that time reserved for that. After this, we'll have this question Q&A after this.
Okay, so this is that. I'm not going to ask you now. I'll just read out. I love this piece. When I wrote it, I loved it when I wrote it. Hopefully, you will like it. This is a character who dies in battle. Again, I'm going to say X where the character's name appears, because I don't want to give it away. Men, X said, his breath coming out in short, quick gasps. This is it. It has been an honor leading you and fighting with you. We will meet again in heaven, where all brave soldiers go. Veeravel, Vetrivel. Veeravel, Vetrivel, cried the men as they stood, wounded but unbent. And this was how the men met their foes as they were overwhelmed in a final battle. 20 enemy soldiers against the last 6. An unequal fight, a short fight, a glorious fight. The men had defied all odds, they had fought gamely. For what purpose they alone knew. For dharma or for sheer professional pride, only they could tell. Their bravery touched even their enemies. Stories of these men would be told and retold in ballads later on, but for now, they fought and fell. One after another, until the only man remaining was X. Down on his haunches, his chest bloodied with cuts, he fought on grimly. But it was too much even for him. Eventually, a sword took him through his chest. He put both his hands to it to see if he could pull it out, but his strength seemed to have deserted him. He lost his balance and fell on his side, his face hitting the ground and the dust rising from the spot. He couldn't hear anything now. Something seemed to have gone wrong with his ears. He could glimpse the feet of many men and the dust on the ground. He could see the bodies of the men he had killed, and he could see the sun on its way down this late in the day. It's a beautiful day, he thought. Such blue skies. I wonder what it would be like to fly up there. Then he couldn't see the sky anymore, nor the sun. A blackness seemed to settle on him as though he were falling. His breath became more and more ragged until eventually he gave a gasp and a final breath escaped his body. The enemy soldiers stood around him, victorious, but not celebrating. The victory had been hard-earned and it had been costly. They had lost many of their comrades. The soldiers looked up and saw Commander Y and Captain Z come up to them. Is that their leader? Asked the commander. The soldiers nodded. Make sure that we cremate the enemy with all due respect. They fought bravely and courageously and deserved that, he said, passing his hand over his face. He was tired. Gods, was he tired. We beat them. but at what cost, he thought bitterly.
Would you like to ask a few questions?
One thing you said about the writers have to be good readers, widely, they should read widely. Well, being an author myself, of course, nothing to do with history, nothing to do with any of the epics or anything, because I'm more a feature writer and a humor known for. So, what I want to ask you is, when you read so much, does your style also get influenced? Or it's something like a style statement. Each person has a different style, like the clothes he wears, you know. So the style, do you emulate anyone's style when you write? That's one. And the second thing that is connected is humor. See, one has to have a funny bone in himself. So you just can't emulate someone's humor or try to copy someone's. It has to be within. So where is the originality in such a case?
So the first question, did I try or do I try and copy someone's style? No. But like I said, sometimes unknowingly, because of the reading I've done, I might write a sentence or two that kind of sort of resembles something a MacLean or somebody might have written, right? But in the end, I think you kind of start developing your own style. So it becomes easier with, or not, I wouldn't say easier, you kind of develop it over the book. So I think my third book is very different from my first book, just in terms of the way I've written it. And with respect to humor, like I said, I think the funniest humor writer ever was P.G. Wodehouse. But there's no way that I think anybody can get away with copying him, right? All you can do is put, you need to have that sense of humor and somehow get your characters into situations either which are funny, but then situational comedy is not my forte. Repartee is something that I think I do better. So have two characters who are diametrically opposed to each other or something like that, who have this quick repartee going on, and that's kind of how I inject humor into it.
See, I have an observation and I have a question to ma'am. Actually, I'm a writer myself. I write short stories in Kumudam. If you actually take Ramayana, Mahabharata, there are many, many small incidences. If you convert that into a social issue, no, it becomes a story. It gives you a knot. For example, many of you might have seen this movie, Dalapati. It is nothing but the fight between, Arjuna and Karna. Okay, he has just expanded it, if you really look at it. Same way, one more book is this Vikramaditya. The whatever riddles he puts, that is a knot. And in fact, that is the ideal, thing for the climax of the movie. And if you go back, you can always create the screens. This is what I have observed. My question to you, ma'am, is there is a Chinese figure in the, that Brahadishwara temple. Is there any background to that?
It's not a Chinese figure, it's a European figure. Is that the one
I
you're
see that figure with some, that hanging mush and, in fact, I just Googled because I didn't want to make a mistake also. It is showing actually.
Okay.
So,
there could be, I may have not
mean,
noticed it. There's no doubt. You see, there was a lot of trade between the Pallavas and China and the Cholas and China. In fact, Rajendra Chola's Kadaram expedition
I know.
was done because the Sri Vijayans, the rulers of Indonesia, thwarted
Chinese influence.
The Chinese trade with the Cholas. So, there being a sculpture of a person who looked Chinese is not at all surprising.
I don't know why it should come in a temple. I mean, is there a significance behind that?
No significance. You see, our temples are, I'm using a very a technical term, microcosms of the macrocosm. Everything in the universe is there. You have your reptiles, you have your birds, you have your flowers, you have your clowns, you have everything, erotic sculptures, etc. So a Chinese also, why not? Absolutely. The Chinese that you see in the Vaikunta Perumal temple in Kanchipuram has been identified by many scholars as Yuan Sang.
That's what I was about to ask. Is it Yuan Sing who has He may not be in that period, but I'm just asking.
The one in the Tanjavur Brihadishwara temple will not be.
Okay.
The one in the Vaikunta Perumal temple in Kanchipuram, which is an 8th century Pallava temple, could definitely be. Because Huinsang came in the 7th century.
I know.
This temple was built in the 8th. So the memory of the visit of this Chinese Buddhist pilgrim could have remained in Kanchipuram and represented in the form of sculpture.
Another author I find very interesting, I don't know whether you have come across, Gokul Seshadri. Okay, his sequels are extremely good, thoroughly researched. In fact, each one of the, he is also from IT background, he lives in US. In fact, I communicate with him. Very well researched and and it is very difficult to write a short story with the historical background. See, any history is only a novel, but writing a short story of 2 or 3 pages with the evidence, it is very difficult, and I think he has achieved that. Thank you.
So before your question, I just wanted to make a comment to that. It's not a Chinese figure, it's a Dutch figure, and that is in a small kuta or a horseshoe arch opposite the Chandikeshwara shrine. So the mystery is very easy to be solved. The temple was renovated during the Nayak times, and the Nayak king was the first king to give the Dutch a place to settle, Tarangambadi, and that the gold patram for that is still in Copenhagen somewhere. They introduced that Chinese figure, the Dutch figure over there.
Which is why I pertinently asked him whether it's a European figure or a Chinese.
But Chitra, it's a common problem. Tirunelveli also, there are a lot of these sculptures with very long moustaches. Unfortunately, Chinese don't own the IP for long moustaches. I mean, we also had
we have watched too many kung fu movies where the master has that.
I think so. My question to you was, did you get a pushback on a trilogy? I mean, people today don't read that much, and why didn't you finish it all in one book?
I'll answer that. If you read this, you'll not put it up.
No, editors and publicists have a very different opinion of that. So I was curious.
So I'll tell you, the only reason I wrote it as a trilogy, because I was ignorant. If I had actually spoken to some authors, they might have dissuaded me from writing a trilogy. When I started writing, remember I said Amish had come up with the Meduha series. That was a trilogy, right? So for me, this was always going to be a trilogy. I knew how the last one ended, obviously. I kind of knew where the first one ended. I didn't know how to end the second one. But I just said, doesn't matter, I'll figure it out. So you are right. If I had to do it again, and if I had to advise somebody, I would say don't do it as a trilogy. Do a single book. It's much easier. It's much less risk for a publisher. This is a big risk for a publisher. Huge risk.
But you will write another trilogy on the Vijayanagar Empire.
If provided you help me with the details. Okay, there you go.
This Mattavilasam book clearly shows that there was seeming side to Kanchi, and I agree with your statement that human nature hasn't changed much. My question is that since you have described these wars and also extensively, how do wars end in your reading of multiple wars? And historically we had wars, and there are perhaps many reasons for wars, the leading figures. So from a fictional point of view, what would you say, do you think wars will end, given that currently we have so many wars going on?
You asked me to comment on wars in general?
Generally the flow of wars.
Wars will never end. We are covetous. We are greedy. We want to expand, and we want what the other people have. As long as that basic trait is there, I don't think wars can ever end. It's a pipe dream. So I'm a realist in these things. I think wars are becoming, in fact, the last 50, 60 years have been the most peaceful in our entire existence, right? I think that's an exception to the rule. So I'm not surprised that wars are going on now.
Thank you.
At the outset, thank you for giving a trilogy on the Chalukyas. So let's hope, like Chitraji said, we'll wait for Vijayanagara and the Satavahanas and Rashtrakutas too.
Sure.
I'm greedy.
Now that ma'am has said she will help with some of the research, I will.
Okay. My
definitely.
thing is, when we read such historicals, we tend to get back in time. And so we also start, thanks to all of you, start thinking in that language and in that assuming the same lingo. So do you have any idea as to why you used the Gregorian calendar in the first passage that you read out? You have used a Gregorian calendar in an 8th century backdrop. Is there any reason for it?
Uh, Purely commercial reasons. I wanted it to be read by people outside of India as well. And I figured if I had gone too much into Chittirai Masam and this and that, I would have had to give footnotes, and it would have been, again, similarly, in fact, Bibek Debroy, who kind of helped, was kind enough to endorse it. He asked me, he said, why have you written, time in hours and seconds? Initially, I was using Nimisha and things like that, and Prahara, and it's just too difficult to convey it every single time. So I said, okay, I will not use kilometers, obviously. So I use miles and yards. I used time, seconds, minutes, and hours. And then I used, March, so that it's easy for people to wrap their heads around it.
And that's what I just didn't want to assume that.
No, yeah, that's
Thank
the
you.
reason.
I would like to ask you what prompted you to study Japanese in the first place. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
What prompted you to study Japanese? And given the fact that for the past 50 to 60 years they gave all their security to the American government. They never undertook security. So it is a very strange country, and I've been fascinated for quite a number of years about the Japanese. Do you notice any difference between our Indian kings, whether South Indian, North Indian, and Japanese? Because they follow Shinto, this thing. So, and when I was listening to Mr. Chandrasekhar ji, he mentioned that you studied Japanese and few other languages as well. So I am very intrigued by your interest in various languages, and particularly in history. They tell history is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
So could you explain?
Sure, it's very simple. I just happened to live in the different places, so I had to pick up the languages. I grew up in Orissa, in Bengal, in the North Kanpur. So yeah, so I lived in Japan for 2 years in a very small town, but my second daughter was born in Japan. And where I lived, it was a small town of 70,000 people. Nobody knew any English. You had to learn. You had to learn. So I learned.
Thank you for this wonderful evening, and it's really a joy to experience or hear your humility, which is very rare these days, and it gives me an idea that you must be a remarkably learned person, which is where the humility comes from. So thank you for that. Now, you obviously are, as Sri Kumar was saying, you're a person who wears many hats, and you mentioned that you finished your book in 3 months. So I'm just curious, and if it's not an intrusion, could you tell us, give us an idea what your writing day and how you work on your books?
Okay. My writing, by the way, for anybody who wants to take up writing as a profession, don't. It doesn't pay. No. There are exceptions. Unless you are Ashwin Sanghi or Amish Tripathi or Chetan Bhagat or ma'am. Okay. So, no, that doesn't put food on my table. I have a day job. Luckily, I do the day job from home. So now the unfortunate part of it is I love writing in the morning, early in the morning, between say 4 and 6. But I can't because my job requires me to be on phone calls late into the night. So I get up later in the day, in the morning by 6:30ish. So what I do is, okay, so I can't write for too long at a stretch. Okay. I write fast, but I can only write for a short period of time. So I try to get like an hour to hour and a half in a day. It could be sometime the afternoon, maybe early evening, something. I'll get that hour and a half. I can hack out about 1,500 words. I set weekly targets. So my weekly target when I write is 10,000 words. Okay. And if I do that, you know, a book is about 80,000 words, right? Which I did. Okay. So here is the interesting bit. If you notice my books, from Nandi's Charge to Simha's Roar, they have gone down in size. Nandi's Charge was 148,000 words. Because I was an ignorant newbie author, I didn't know better. Varaha's Vengeance was 110, and Simha's Roar is about 90, which is, so the ideal book size that publishers want is between 80,000 to 90,000 words. So if I do 10K words a week, in 2 months I should finish it. Given my work pressures and all, 3 months. So I can write a book in 3 months, provided I know what the overall story is that I write. It is. So the thing somebody taught me was it is all about discipline. You have to write every day. Even if you write one sentence that day, sit down and write that one sentence so that you don't fall out of practice.
So you never had that writer's block?
No, I have plot blocks. So I don't have writer's block in the sense of, oh, I don't know how I'm going to describe something. But I have a plot block where this guy is there, stuck there, and he has to get to some other place. How do I untangle that? That if you call that a writer's block, I might have it. But from in terms of just purely putting words down on paper, I've never had that.
And I just said, what about the women in your books?
I think they have to. I mean, I think I've done justice to the women in my books, but
More than justice. But you have to wait to read it. I can't give anything away.
No, you had people like Nandini and all, right? So.
There's a tragic moment in the end. So that's very sad. That's the only thing we can give away now. I think you, with your thanks, wind it up.
So, I would like to again thank CIC for giving us this platform to have this lovely evening. I would like to thank, Shri Kumar ji and Chitra ma'am for kindly agreeing. I was, again, like I said, two things. I was very hesitant. Shri Kumar ji, Chinu sir reached out to him, and that was, it's the first time meeting him, and I'm just humbled enormously. Chitra ma'am, I somehow got her number and then reached out to her, and she was so gracious. She responded so quickly, and then she was very kind to go through it. Both of them were kind enough to go through the books. My heartfelt thanks to both of you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you in this short discussion. And thanks to all of you for coming on a Saturday evening to listen to a book talk. So and I see some, I must point out a few people. My uncles are here, my cousins here, my friends from, my boarding schoolmate is here from Chennai, MCC. Oh, by the way, he's also from MCC, he's a senior. So we are supposed to salute him. Oh, no, Madras Christian College School, not college. They have come from my uncle. Yeah, they have come from Kanchipuram. My principal from my first boarding school in Kodaikanal, Premila Akka, is here. So I'm so humbled that all of you have taken time out to come. Thank you so much.
So let's give a big round of applause to our learned panel. Thank you very much, Chitraji, for coming down. She's no stranger to CIC. She has been here often. Shikmaji, I don't know whether you have been at CIC before. You have. So thank you once more. And of course, we hope that this is not the first of your writing ventures, but we have more occasions to launch your books at the CIC. As I mentioned earlier, CIC is a platform where we encourage intellectual discussions, debates, as well as book launches like this. And I'm happy that you have turned up to encourage us in our efforts. So as we wind up this session, any announcements for the next session? We have, that is on the 6th. 26th. On the 26th, we have another event. This will be on a book about Mr. Parasaran. And the venue is not here. It is here only. The venue is this Tagore Auditorium, and we hope that many of you will turn up for that too. So with that, we wind up this session. Let's have one more round of applause for our very erudite panel. Thank you very much.